I do want to make sure you're introduced to my lovely wife, Connie, because we have decided to do this journey together. Many folks would have totally separate your business life and your home life, and in some cases your church life, and all of that is separated out. But we chose to do life together, and she left a very successful consulting business in the banking industry to come to work for PSST early on, and in that particular case, she was offered no salary, no benefits, and no car. She had a company car, so she decided to leave all of that and join in on this journey together, and for that I will be eternally grateful. Thank you, sweetheart, for the journey that we had for 28 years together. Absolutely. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about logistically is that the clipboard that was passed around for you to sign in the right-hand column, it says slides. Now, that's probably an old term because I'm old, but if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, just make sure you take that back and put yes or a check mark, and make sure your email is on there and most of all legible, and then we'll make sure that we get a copy sent to you so that you can share that. Nothing of what we say today is proprietary. We're here to share our experience, or as we say on the slide, that this is definitely our journey, and each one of you all will have your own journey in the process of succession for the business. How many business owners do we have here today? Yeah, we've got several. Some are nonprofit, some are for-profit, and that's a great mix. You know, Zig Ziglar, the great presenter, once said, "Some of us learn from other people's mistakes, and the rest of us have to be the other people," right? So in this particular case, we have been the other people, and we just want to share a little bit on our journey, just so that we can share that with one another. Something that we forget quite often is common sense is only common if it gets shared, right? So that's what we want to do today, is to share a little bit about that. We spent 28 years building what we thought was a Christ-centered, Christ-honoring company. And I think we did that successfully in a lot of areas. And then there are some areas that we could have done better. So today we're going to talk through the journey a little bit about what we did well and a little bit about what we could do maybe a little bit better. So we're going to follow this agenda, if you would. Why plan for business succession? Everybody probably says, "Oh, I know the answer to that," but we're going to talk a little bit about it and share our story. And then most of all, if you're a business owner, at the end, I want you to ask the question, what is my next step in preparing for succession? Because it is going to happen. Did you know that family-owned businesses generate 50% of our gross national product? Oh, we think Ford and Toyota and GE and Microsoft and Apple. I'm telling you, the people represented in this room represent 50% of productivity in this country. You think, what I do in my business really isn't important. It is. It's very, very important. But here's the other statistic that almost keeps you awake at night. In small family, medium-sized businesses, 50%, less than a third will not make it past the second generation. Whoever you pass it to may not make it into that. And here's the scary one, that half of those that are left will not make it through the third generation. So the question that we have today, in your succession plan, looking down the road, will your business be in the 80% or the 20%? And a lot of that is going to determine by your planning and your preparation and how you do it and if you do it well. I have a business partner, Roger Dillon. Some of you all probably know Roger, and he and I were having a discussion about some legal questions, and he asked me, well, what's your biblical basis for doing that? And I thought, wow, that's a great question. What was our biblical basis? So, I went and found some scriptures that I think are appropriate to us, and you'll notice the commonality in all the scriptures is about planning. And it says, we can plan, God prepares our steps for us. So we need to plan. And this is the one that we always quote when it comes to business, right? But it's so important. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. So today, our hope is we're one of the many that you have in getting prepared for your business succession plan. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Why should you plan for your business succession? Well, probably one of three things is going to happen in your business. You're either going to plan well and either your employees or maybe your children are going to take over your business. That's how a lot of family businesses move to Generation 2, Gen 2. And I think that'll probably be the case to here. I would say that if you're planning on transferring your business in this fashion, that you need to plan on 2 to 5 years for that to happen. At least 2 to 5 years in order for that to happen. Now, if you're going to maybe sell your business, got there too quick. If you're going to sell your business, you're going to need 3 to 5 years at a minimum. As I tell people, yep, we were headed into the 5th year of our 3-year plan. So we obviously didn't plan well because it took longer, and we still could have done that better. But I also want to say to you that in this scenario, 288 business owners, business leaders went to work on this day. And if they had not planned for business succession, it was going to happen. And that may happen to us too. We don't have our business in the World Trade Center. But we can have a car wreck, we could have a heart attack, we could have a terrorist attack, whatever, and tomorrow you're not going to be in your business. What happens? Well, I don't know. I don't want to think about that. But it's like life insurance. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but how many of you have life insurance to take care of your family if something happens to you tomorrow? And I'm going to guess that it's a large majority of those sitting in this room. How many have a business continuation plan if you're not there tomorrow for your business? And I will just end this by saying there is a succession in your business. The only question is when and how well you plan for it. And just like we don't like to do life insurance, but we do it because we know the unexpected may happen, we need to do that well here. And then I would say to you, don't forget this. You need many advisors to be able to do this well. I want to tell a little bit about our story. What's it look like? Well, from our experience, you need to seek wise counsel. Well, who's wise counsel? Well, what we did is much like if you're getting ready to sell your home or your house, you probably are going to go get a real estate agent. You can sell it yourself, but if you want the best opportunity, you're going to get an expert. we got a mergers and acquisitions agent from here in Louisville to help us through that process. Wise counsel, so they could help us understand what we didn't know in the process. When the business sold, we went and we secured a mergers and acquisitions attorney who this is their business. Someone that can read that sale contract. Now, we just sold our assets. We didn't sell the whole company. We still have the structure of the company. We just don't have customers, vendors, or employees anymore, or need to lease space anymore. But even in that, our purchase agreement was very thick. And there's a lot of terminology in there that you probably won't understand. You need someone that can tell you what's in there and what the pitfalls are when you get to that point. We also hired a mergers and acquisitions accountant who was experienced in looking at the numbers, that could advise us how to make sure our numbers were. And most importantly, if you were in my last presentation, you know that I am going to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Jesus told us to do that, but no more than I have to. And so we got wise counsel to help us to make sure that what's in that document abides by our IRS regulations, so that the least amount is taxable in the transfer. Some assets they buy are taxable, some things are not. You want to get it in that non-taxable category as much as you can. Wise counsel. You definitely need wise counsel. Oh, and I might also say my TCA group. Boy, I leaned on them, because some of them had been through this process before and could give us advice, and that was excellent advice. When God speaks, you may not understand. If you were going to sell your business, you would probably spend a lot of time in prayer, and you want God to give you a neon sign or a billboard that says, this is exactly what I want you to do. Do I sell? Do I not sell? Do I sell to this buyer or this buyer? Do I sell to my employees? Which one of these many options do I seek? And we prayed. We prayed a lot, asking for God's direction. And have you prayed, and it seems to be a desert? Nothing is growing. And you're going, oh, come on, Lord, you've got to give me some direction here. Because what's our fear? Making the wrong decision, right? So after much prayer, after some options, I said to the Lord one night, God, I dream. I dream when I go to bed. Not every night, but some nights I dream. Just give me a dream. And when I wake up in the morning, I'll have some clear direction. Laid my head on the pillow, went to sleep, woke up the next morning, best night of rest I've ever had. Nothing, no dream, nothing, no direction from God in what I needed to do. So my first reaction was much like yours. Oh, no, God didn't speak to me. And then during the course of that day, I kept saying, what's this mean, Lord? And He finally revealed, my child, it doesn't make any difference. I've got you. And your company is good. And I'm going to use your company. And I'm going to use you in the next chapter of life. And the details, just leave to me. I got them. Now, did we make the best decision? I don't know. But I know one thing. God's in control. And we'll talk a little more about some of those decisions. But you may not understand everything as God is saying to you. Include those who need to be included. If some of you all attended the strategic planning session, you heard Carl Williams, who is now President and CEO of PSST. Another whole story about him in just a moment. We did not tell everybody in the world that we were selling our business. We obviously brought Carl into the discussion when we got to a certain place, because we didn't want people worrying people projecting, and especially when we didn't have all the answers to give them. You know, there's nothing worse than giving your team this much information, because they'll come back with 50 questions, won't they? And they'll want to know, what's next? How's this going to be? So we only included those people that needed to be included, which also conversely means don't include those people that don't need to be included. So wise counsel from us. So the question is when? When? 3 to 5 year transition plan. How do I do that? Well, first of all, I would say remove yourself from the management of your company in the process of the transition. We did this before we sold. Well, how do you do that? Well, some of the things that we did is we started removing ourselves from critical meetings. We'd go to staff meetings and we'd sit quietly, and we would let our team manage what was going on. And Carl knew we were backing out, so we didn't offer input unless it was absolutely critical to the company. So make sure you can back yourself out a little bit. We were fortunate enough, our company was growing, and we bought another set of condos and another building. And as difficult as this was for Connie, who is a people person, we physically removed ourselves from everybody else. Now, our development team was over there, but we were in a different building. Nobody could just come by your offices and say, oh, by the way, what do you think about that decision we're making? Because we did not want to offer input into that. So you have to remove yourself physically, and you have to remove yourself physically if you can. That doesn't happen all the time. Skip some meetings. Connie would come up to me and she says, they're having a meeting about this. Aren't you going? No, I'm not going. They'll either make a good decision or they won't. But if I wasn't here tomorrow, it wouldn't make any difference. So we'll just let them make those decisions. And for those of us who are Class A, boy, I would say to you, you've got to remove your ego out of the process. Because I'd probably say, can your business run without you? And just almost immediately you'd say, why no, they can't do it without me. And if you can't say, yes, they can, you've got a problem. And if you can't allow the leaders to make leadership decisions and live or die with them. Now, you know, if they made a decision that was absolutely critical to the company, then I can tell you what you need to do. And that's this. Listen and mentor privately. Take that person aside and say, can I offer some input to that decision? Tell me what you're thinking. And if you have weekly meetings, you can understand kind of where the leadership team's going, so you're kind of ahead of that. But don't embarrass your new leaders. Let them lead. You don't ever want to undercut those that you've put into authority. Let your entire staff know that you have confidence in them and that you want them leading. And then the last thing I would say is don't stay too long. I mean, how many succession stories have you read that, especially the older people, you know, well, I'm going to leave in 3 years. Oh, well, it's going to be another 3 years. Oh, well, I can't leave yet. I need to buy a new golf cart. Well, don't stay too long. Did we stay too long? We probably did. My wife would probably disagree with me a little bit on that. We're old, and we grew up under a different management style. We grew up in a different marketing and sales style. We grew up and we ran our company very conservatively. You don't have any debt. You look at every expenditure. You make sure it's needed. And sometimes you need new blood, new thoughts, new ideas to move your company forward. And since we've left, PSST has continued to grow. It's continued to grow in its faith-based organization, and it continues to grow in people, size, staff, and influence in the areas where we needed influence. Don't stay too long. And you need staff to replace you. Now, I said earlier, don't let your ego get in the way, but we've let our egos get in the way over the course of running our organizations, haven't we? And there are things that we do that nobody else can do as well as we do. And that's probably a true statement because we've been there all along. But you have to identify every place where you have influence in your company. So, where are all the places? Well, obviously, day-to-day operations, but I would ask you, look at where you have influence in yearly things and in long-term things, and make sure that there's somebody that is picking up that influence in your company. Relationships. Oh man, we've been there all along. We've got these key relationships. You need to figure out how to transfer those relationships to the next generation and let them pick them up. The question was said, they're going to this trade show. You know all those people, aren't you going? No, I'm not going. Because if I'm there, I become an influence by my presence. I don't want that. And I want those relationships to start building. By the way, when you started your company, you were in the same boat your new leaders are, right? You didn't have any relationships. You had to build them. And you went out of your way to build them. So empower your leaders to build those relationships and continue on. Do you mentor people in your company? You need to make sure that you've got somebody in your company that will mentor them as you continue on. This is an area where we had to be very proactive. We had counseling and chaplain and Christian leadership all on our staff. Most of it was Connie and I. She's the resident counselor in our company. You probably have one of those. You may even be that person in your company. Who's going to do that? Well, we went and hired a corporate chaplain to come into our organization. And that's a wise move even if you're not looking for succession, because you need someone that can interface with your employees and not have that, I work for them barrier in the way. So I really suggest that you look at doing that. Connie had a rocking chair in her office, and almost every employee sat in that rocking chair at one time or another. Some open door, some closed door about that. And then we had clients that would call and that would say, hey Connie, I know you all are a praying company. My husband just was diagnosed with cancer. One of our co-workers just lost their daughter in a car wreck. Would you all pray for them? And we would. And we not only would say, yes, we'll pray for you. Part of our standard answer, some of the times, was, let me pray for you right now while you're on the phone. And somebody's going to have to do that in your company. Who's going to do that? You've got to raise up that next level of leadership. Planning, I probably don't need to tell you about long-term planning. You're probably the planner in your company. You probably have the vision. You probably know where you're going with that. Somebody has to do that. Go back, make a list of everything you do, and start putting names out beside those so that if something happens to you, everything continues. And strategic planning. We were pretty good at strategic planning. One of the things that we wanted to make sure we brought into our staff was better strategic planning. Carl came on our team. That's one of his strengths. If you were in his presentation, you know that. And you need to make sure that all of that is there to replace you in your 3 to 5 year transition plan. What do I do about my finances? Well, you need to make sure that your balance sheet, your profit and loss, your budgets, all of those are cleaned up and look good, would you present them to a prospective buyer today? No, because you probably don't look at those real close in every area, especially your balance sheet. But you need to make sure that those look the best they can look as you prepare for transition. Processes and procedures. How many have a standard operating procedure manual that covers everything you do in operations? Yeah, we didn't either. When a buyer comes looking at your company, or when the group that you're going to leave in charge has a question, how do you do this? They need somewhere to go and find that answer, unless you want them calling your cell phone all hours of the night of, how do we do this? Make sure that your processes and procedures are well documented and can be followed. That took us a lot of work, but we got there. And then make sure you've got a strategic plan. If I'm a buyer and I'm coming and I'm going to look at your company, I don't want to know what you've done in the past. That is of interest, but that's not what I want to know. What I'm buying is where you're going. What are you going to do? What's your plan? What's your projected budgets and revenue and expenses and net profit for the next 3 to 5 years? Now, some of us are good at that, but some of us probably are not. Those are the things that we need to do as we continue in our succession planning. Now, we hired Michael. Here's a free ad for Michael to go out and find us a candidate that could sit in my seat and then subsequently find one that could sit in Connie's seat. Because if you don't have somebody inside that can do that, you need to go outside and find them. And in this case, Michael found us an excellent candidate in Carl Williams. We brought Carl in. He became our client success director, which means he learned the business by dealing with the clients and the software and the processes that we did. And he continued to document those and get the procedure manual together for all of those. And then after a couple of years, we promoted him to Chief Operations Officer. So now he's over the entire operations of the company, which continued to get him familiar with what we were doing. And then in the process, as we're backing out, he takes on more and more. And today he's president and CEO of PSST. But he had the qualifications. First of all, he's well grounded in his faith and in the execution of his faith and in working in his community and with the experience that he had. But most of all, he had a drive to be an entrepreneur. And that's part of what it took. And that worked extremely well for us as we did that. There's another set of planning that you need to do, and that is, if I sell my business, how am I going to honor God in that? One of the decisions that we made early on was very similar as Alan Bonhart's, but not quite at that level. We decided and we felt the call from God that we needed to take a part of our ownership and we needed to set that aside for ministry and missions purposes. Now I'm going to share a little bit with you. As they say, what's shared in this room stays in this room. So I'm going to trust you with that. But we decided to take 18% of our ownership and to gift that to the National Christian Foundation. There are other groups here that do something similar. Just like Alan, we chose NCF and we gave part of our company to them. Yep, there's a tax benefit to doing that, both short-term and long-term. But our thought process was, we're going to give it to God before it ends up in our hands. Because if you get it in your hands, if you're not disciplined, it's going to slip through your fingers and go somewhere else. So we did that. Turned out to be one of the best decisions we did. I know your question's going to be, Why 18%? 10%'s a tithe, but it's your whole business and it's not your I don't know. God told us 18%. Come see me in 20 years, and maybe I'll know the answer to that question, but that's what it was, and that's what we did. So we remained faithful to that. The other thing that we did well is we hired all the right experts, and I shared some of that with you a little earlier. We hired a corporate chaplain, which was one of the best decisions that we made. And I can tell you that there are discussions between some of our employees and our corporate chaplain that probably wouldn't happen between us as owners. And I'm going to encourage you to do that. Make sure you've got a good bank relationship. Again, stays in this room, but one of the things was obviously there was going to be some financial transfer of funds when we closed. Now, we did a 5-year buyout, so we're here for 5 years for this to all happen. Side note, I wouldn't do that again, but we did that, and it's a 5-year buyout. But we got a transfer of funds, so went to the bank and said, we're gonna get some funds transferred in for the company. Wasn't for us, for the company, because they were buying the company's assets, and I can do a couple of things with these. I can go put this money somewhere else that's going to get a higher interest rate than you're paying on a money market account. But I'd really like to leave this money in your bank since I've had a relationship with you for 30 years. And they gave us a much higher interest rate on the money that we put there. It goes back to the old adage, you never get unless you ask. So go ask and talk to your banker and see if you can't get that. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is the due diligence process. What's a due diligence process? If somebody's going to buy your company, they want to know everything that's in your company. They want to know everything about your company. They want no surprises. And it's going to be an arduous process. Here is our due diligence process. And I've taken all the names off, and if you want to look at it, I'll be glad to share that with you. But just let me quickly share with you the areas and the number of questions they had. Finance, 40 requests for information. Taxes, 28. Legal, 92. HR, 56. Payroll, 21. Treasury, 17. Sales and marketing, 7. Facilities, insurance, miscellaneous, IT infrastructure, 45 requests for information about IT, 39 on security, and 31 on ethics and compliance. And you know what? I had to answer every one of those. So knowing your business is very, very, very important. So share that later if you'd like to do that. What is the area that we could have improved in? Do not rush. Do not rush. We had a buyer and we were leaving on a 2-week cruise for our 30th anniversary with some friends. Now I know most of you ladies would say, don't do that. Don't go on your anniversary cruise and take friends with you. But we did. And we were trying to get closed before that cruise. And we did. And we pushed and we got done. There were benefits of doing that. I don't know if I'd do that again because there were just some things that didn't get the last look through. Some of the things on the balance sheet didn't get as cleaned up as I wish that they did. And they have come back to haunt us a little bit. We're in a resolution process right now. They will get straightened out and hopefully to our understanding, but don't rush. Make sure that you have everything that you do. Know your buyers. Know your buyers. We thought we did, but we didn't do as much due diligence on our buyers. We knew they weren't Christian. We knew that they were investors. I wished we had done a little more due diligence on those. Know your buyers before you sell, or know anyone that you're transferring your company to. And make sure that your merger and acquisitions team has time to do your transaction, because in our process, our closing attorney was also doing 3 other closings, and I just didn't get as much of his time as quickly as I wanted it in that process. So, other areas of improvement, make sure your balance sheet is accurate, because you're going to live or die by those assets and liabilities that you put there. Understand your employee contracts and the accruals, because you're going to live or die by those. We knew we were going to do this, but we had to calculate it. You know, you have employees, they all have leave accruals, right? You've given them sick leave and vacation and personal leave, and if you transfer that company to somebody else, you're going to pay that company for that leave, because that's a liability you owe, and they're not going to take that on. And all of that fine print in there says that your responsibility is employee liabilities, not theirs, or any lawsuits that you're in, or any transaction negotiations you're in. So make sure that that is taken care of. And then I can't tell you this one enough. And I know I don't need to tell Christians about praying, that you certainly need to pray. What's your next step? If you thought you were going to lose your company tomorrow, that you were no longer going to be there, what's the 1, 2, 3 steps that you would leave this meeting saying, I'm going to do? And I'm going to encourage you to do that, because we all need to figure out what we're doing, how we're going to do it, and what happens if I'm not there tomorrow, right? Thank you all. Any questions? Love to entertain questions about our business succession, positive or negative.
When you were introduced to your buyer and you shared with them your appreciation for corporate chaplaincy because they came from a non-Christian background, how did that conversation take place? How did it translate?
Excellent question. How did it translate to our buyers about having a corporate chaplain? And I'm going to extend that to say have a Christian atmosphere within your company and answer both of those. It's interesting. The buyers came in during probably 3 weeks before the closing. We hadn't told our employees yet. So we went to dinner the first night that they came in, had a discussion. A lot of that discussion was about our culture. We left dinner and we went to our offices. All the employees had gone after hours. We showed them around the offices, and we were walking back through the offices, and my dedicated, loving partner in this journey cornered the buyers. And she said to them, you know our culture is extremely important to us. What are you going to do to make sure this is right and that we will continue that? Are you going to take care of my employees? Are you going to take care of my clients? Because clients are our first concern. You know, as we told all of our employees, you don't take care of the clients, they don't send a check, you don't get paid. You know, you got to take care of them, number one. And they said, you know what's interesting? Part of what we really want to buy is your corporate culture. So we're not going to change your corporate culture at all. And we will keep the corporate chaplain. And if you want to pray before all of your meetings, some of the things that we did, you know, if during the course of the day we got a call or an employee came in and said, yeah, you know, my husband's having tests run at 3 o'clock today or whatever, we'd gather right in the middle of our company and we'd pray. We'd get a great big old circle. Not everybody's required to come. Get an email that says we're going to pray for Sam or Joe or Sue at 3 o'clock. Meet at the conference room. And they wanted our corporate culture. But I'm going to say the most important decision that we made is having deeply committed Christians in the leadership position of our company to replace our influence when we were gone. Every level of management under us had some level of Christian commitment. And I say that because not all of them were as outwardly expressive of their love for Christ as we were. But they knew our culture. And one of our employees, who was probably at the lower echelons of that list, said in a leadership meeting one day, "You all don't have to worry. We're going to start every meeting with prayer if you all aren't here." You know, and that's when we looked at one another and said, yes, because if someone who doesn't express that says that, we're ready. So getting your leadership team, that's why that 3 to 5 years is critical, to make sure everybody in that position is a strong Christian supporter of what you're doing. In our case, the buyers aren't here. One's in Pennsylvania and the other partner is in Colorado. So who runs our company? Our leaders, the ones that we left behind. Most important decision you'll ever make. Yeah, thanks for the question. Others, yes.
So what was the reaction of the buyers in you giving away a part of your company?
What was the reaction of the buyers that we had given away part of our company? Probably, Anna, the answer is they didn't care. They were buying the assets of the company, and they were going to write the company a check, and then the company would disperse the funds. Now, we did an asset sale versus a company sale, so a little bit different. NCF, National Christian Foundation, was just another entry on those due diligence sheets. Who's your owners? How much ownership do they have? So they really didn't care. Wasn't even a part of the conversation. But after the sale, to be able to share with them in kind of a witness basis is, you all purchased our assets. Let us share with you some of what's happening with that the distributions through NCF. So just as a side note, I had a dear friend that said to me, what's the largest check you've ever written to a support organization? And I was almost embarrassed to give him the answer, but since selling our company, that number has gone up, of being able to write checks to ministries we love and support. And much like our keynote speaker, being able to contribute to the kingdom is it's a feeling that we're enjoying right now. So, yeah. Other questions? We've got about 5 or 4 minutes left.
What was the biggest surprise? You spent all these years growing the business. It's not like you were a serial entrepreneur per se. So what kind of came out of left field and you just were most surprised about through this whole process?
What were the surprises coming out of left field? Probably the biggest surprise is, I got to be careful here, that the buyers whose attorneys wrote the asset purchase agreement didn't seem to abide by the asset purchase agreement, and that we've ended up with a resolution accountant on that. That was our biggest surprise. We really thought, you've got a document, it outlines everything, this is going to be easy to follow, and that hasn't happened. That was our biggest surprise. The positive surprise, all of our employees were absolutely happy for us. They said, you all have worked all your life to build a company, and even though they now work for an investment group that operates totally different than we do and than we did, they've all said, we're so happy for you all, go enjoy. So that was a positive surprise coming out of that. the company's continued to grow. And Carl has continued to keep the Christian atmosphere. One of the things that we heard this year doing the Affordable Care Act reporting and end of year and so forth, they had some pretty huge sales goals. And PSST would meet at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and have a praise service for those that wanted to come to praise God for what was going on in our company and pray for His favor. How many companies do you know that do that? You know, probably in nonprofits, you get together and you pray for God's favor, but a for-profit company? Yeah, those are all the positives coming out of that. Daryl.
Sorry, Bob Russell wrote a really good book about his successor and how he phased out. Have you considered doing that? Your story's powerful. It would really be great in a book, and whether people.
Well, the question is, have we thought about writing a book because Bob Russell did such a great job on his succession plan? And I would say at this point, God's not moved us in that direction, but if He does, we'll certainly be open to it. I do think there's powerful components of our story, and our story will be different than everybody else's story because no two stories are alike.
Absolutely, because Bob comes from a nonprofit world. You're coming from a for-profit, so it's different. Building a company on a Christian ethic.
I don't know. That would be interesting. We'll certainly consider that. Thank you.
Just a quick comment, it is unusual that the team would stay together as tightly as they have and to continue to follow your all's lead after you're gone. So I think this transition is quite remarkable and much to be proud of. And I know you give honor to God in this, but it is a really good story with I know there's some bumps still, but it's a pretty happy ending.
Yeah, we would say so. So, thank you, Michael. Thank you all so very much. On the sign-in sheet, if you want a copy of the slides, be glad to send them to you. Just put yes or a check mark over in that right-hand column. Make sure I can read your email address, and then we'll send those to you, and hopefully we'll be one of those other people that you can learn from through life. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure today.